get into is measurement and attribution. Obviously, this is a complete rabbit hole. We opened a can of worms, and the usual covenant I give when I discuss this is we're not going to solve this today, unfortunately. But what I will say is that I think the problem with measurement and attribution is that it's often built, it's built sort of the wrong way around. It's built from the sense that we must measure leads, we must measure MQLs, we must measure deals, when really the company that you're working for might have a totally different objective to what you're measuring against at a strategic, actual business strategy level, and that's kind of where I think there can be a disconnect, especially when you're having very senior conversations, because the board might be interested in market share and you're measuring deal value, you're optimizing for deal size, and then your board or your executive team is wanting latitude in terms of growth. Then they're kind of different things. The challenge that is more likely to come up is between marketing and sales. You have perhaps a VP of sales or CRO or sales executive, for lack of a better term, and this person has their goals. They're focused on deals, quota, whatever it is, probably quota in terms of pipeline and probably quota in terms of deals sold. And then you have the other side of which is marketing, which is over here like a little hamster wheel trying to generate leads from Facebook forms, and the sales team's getting them, they're not really addressing them. And I think that the outcome that I looked toward there was like, how can we find a common metric that we both can get behind but holds both teams accountable? And this metric is not popular in the eyes of some LinkedIn commentators, but I believe that marketing influenced revenue is an important metric, in the sense that if you can show that marketing has involved itself in a meaningful sense in the buyer journey, then it deserves to have some level of credit, because marketing might be involved, say, at the very start of the journey. It might be involved through enablement activities at the very end of the journey. There is, for some weird reason, this idea that the only way marketing can be involved or generate deals at a lot of companies is through the generating of a lead. And I just think that is kind of, relatively outdated as far as how we measure marketing input these days. And it restricts you. But at the basic level, you're going to have a team that probably has a subscription to HubSpot and is using HubSpot's lead source. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's consistent. It's, frankly, HubSpot is pretty accurate a lot of the time in terms of capturing the actual thing that happened. It might not be the full story, but it's still, consistent at least. So that's sort of the first story. And, you get your breakdown of lead sources and stuff, and it's reliable data for the most part. HubSpot does provide even multi-touch now, but I mean, typically that's sort of lead source or last touch, usually. Although there is flexibility in the tool to sort of change that. It's pretty good considering this sort of the market that it's intended to be used by. I think that the next ground is where you get into more of sort of, to some extent, sort of the more descriptive statistics, where you have that, you start pivoting by like lead source and campaign, and then you're kind of pivoting by markets, and so you've got all your variables kind of in your CRM, or hopefully in some kind of more mature database environment, probably like a Tableau or a Looker or something. And in that environment, people are able to go in, they're able to self-serve to some extent on data analytics. It's a little bit more open and transparent. Google Data Studio is fine. I love Data Studio. I think in that sort of middle stage, you're kind of, you're in one sense, you can be reliant on a lot of the sort of the simpler mechanics of measurement, but you kind of need to get to the next stage as well. So but you also want the consistency for reporting backward as well. So it can be a really challenging stage for companies to be in. And typically you're going to see companies that are perhaps, 1,000 employees, or maybe they got into it early. They're 500 to 1,000 employees in this stage. I mean, it could be media modeling. It could be just, frequency tables of like factors. They're probably using some kind of last touch. They're probably using some kind of lead scoring. Maybe they're using some kind of influence. It's all vendor driven usually. So I think, it's not so much about necessarily the tools. It's more about how the data is being used and how it's being used to inform decisions, more so above like just looking at a source and like a metric as a result of that. So like, you'll be trying to understand, basically it's like a pivot table, in a sense. You're kind of at that level, and you've managed to get all the data consolidated. You've got ETLs between platforms. Maybe you've got your email data flowing in mixed with some ads data flowing in. You've got potentially some kind of like display data flowing in or something. Like you've maybe got like a tech target or something. Like, so you've got all these different sort of attributes flowing in, and you kind of are trying to combine them all together on the account record and make sense of it. And that's where a lot of companies are at, and frankly that's where a lot of companies stay, and that's fine as long as there's consistency to it. But you always have this sort of the looming question is like, is this the full story? Are we actually learning everything that we can out of this? Like, is there more to it? Having been in a few companies sort of at that stage now, that's sort of what I always find fascinating. Like, how can we do more with this? And I think the third sort of stage on this gradation, if you like, is really where you start to, you have dedicated marketing analytics teams. You're using predictive analytics in a lot of cases to inform future investment decisions that are mathematically based, and probably based using some kind of machine learning approaches as well. One of the activities that I've done with a few companies is not strictly in the vein of measurement per se, but it's sort of like an ICP exercise where we take the elements of cohorts of customers, and we look to apply those elements through what we call like a random forest model in the machine learning field to a completely larger subset of prospective customers. There are similar things you can do when it comes to measurement, as far as informing investment decisions in channel mix and stuff like that. So it's media mix modeling to some extent. The other thing you can do is also draw inference. So if we invest in X amount of money in this channel, what does that mean in terms of output and influence on other channels and things like that? So it's almost like regression-based analysis, and then it gets more and more advanced from there, and you can feed that back in through APIs to ad platforms and all sorts of things like that. I think that's kind of like the mature stage, but that relies upon having skilled analysts and ML engineers and technical marketers at the helm to really build something like that. And and it's not all clear cut either, and it is dependent on a lot of data that is becoming harder and harder to either collect or utilize because of growing privacy concerns.